Good morning and welcome to the 2011 Endeavor event. I work here in the Silicon Valley with the IBM Almaden Research Center. I've been here in the Valley around innovation now for about 22 years. And it's a pleasure to be with this many entrepreneurs. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Watson, give you kind of a brief overview of some of the technology challenges, a little bit about the team, a behind-the-scenes look at what it took to actually bring a computer avatar and actually bring it to compete with humans and actually help with the human understanding of the idea of bringing this computer to compete with humans. As well as at the end, we have time to test your wit and skill on a Jeopardy game. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing we like to do is we like to compare ourselves to the other things that transformed our industry. Obviously, as you know, search has a major impact on the way the technology has really changed our lives. And the way search works is that the decision maker has a question. He distills that to 2 or 3 keywords. And depending on their skill and ability, they can put plus signs and a few things, type that in a box, and send that to a search engine. That will actually come back delivering documents that match those keywords. The user then reads the documents, finds the answers, and analyzes the evidence. This is very similar to the way Watson works, except it goes a little bit deeper. As far as expert analysis, you ask a question. The expert has to understand the question, produce possible answers and evidence, and analyze the evidence, computes the confidence. This is a really important thing, that this really changed the way and the paradigm of going from search to an expert system. Many people believed that the expert system has to be generative. In other words, you have to make it like a legal case, and you have to, once you understand this, now I understand that, and you actually have a building approach or a generative approach to understanding and parsing the natural language. This poses a very significant challenge, as well as that approach is not very well suited to computers and processing. And so one of the basic keys to the innovation that actually happened with a summer student back in 2007, they came up with a completely different paradigm about innovation that completely changed the results and the achievements that could be achieved with natural language processing. And the concept was actually very simple. It was to take all possible search cases, send them out, analyze them, and actually use discrimination to throw out the ones that had very limited support or very limited evidence. And as we as humans, the way we think about things, when we look at different data sources, different sources of the information, we learn to trust different sources of information. That's exactly what Watson does. So as it looks at all the different sources, all the different possible parsings and search that it would send out, roughly 208 hypotheses for every question generated. It would come back and send that to the engine and actually analyze that and determine which of those 208 had the best supporting evidence. And there it had a voting algorithm and actually decided which one to answer with, and if it had a high enough confidence level to actually answer the question. So once it does that, delivers a response, and thus provides a single answer from all those different data sources. So how many watched the IBM and Kasparov chess challenge? It was a very significant point in time, but actually very different than the Jeopardy challenge. The Jeopardy challenge is really analyzing and understanding natural language text. And really the innovation is being able to do that at a high precision and a high confidence. So if you look at chess, a very interesting game, but it's very explicit and unambiguous, and it has mathematical background. The human language is very contextual, ambiguous. There's riddles, rhymes, fuzziness, the way that we interact with each other. There's a lot of fuzzy context, and you have to have a deep understanding of multiple knowledge to actually make sense of some of the things that you hear to understand them. So if we look at the way computers actually use this information and just determine where Einstein was born, there's many structured type elements that computers are very good at. They can do a lookup table. But if you look at something like this, one day from among his city views of Ulm, Otto chose a watercolor to send to Albert Einstein as a remembrance of Einstein's birthplace. So with that, you have to understand, well, what is remembrance? What does the city views, all those things, just to determine where Einstein is born. And these are some of the challenges. Another example with Jack Welch being a master painter during his tenure at GE. So if you look at all the different information sources, the hard part is to use discrimination techniques to determine what is actually being asked and what information may provide the best clues to the answer. Where Watson really doesn't discriminate, he'll send them all out and look for supporting evidence among everything that gets sent out. So really the Jeopardy challenge, one of the key things about it, it's broad and open domain. It's a wide range of questions and answers, and that's part of the big challenge is you have to know the answers to anything. And so part of the Watson system was being able to analyze all this information and bring it back without being connected to the internet and being challenged with some of the finest Jeopardy competitors there ever were. So let me skip ahead to I want to talk about analyzing some deeper evidence. Some of the basic techniques that Watson uses is, if you look at, in May 1998, Portugal celebrated the 400th anniversary of this explorer's arrival in India. If it could actually find keywords of those things on the right, it would think that it have a very good evidence to support that theory. But in this case, there is only one keyword on the right that supports the theory. And so if you look at that, there's many things that have to happen as far as dates, times, there's temporal reasoning, there's statistical paraphrasing, and there's geospatial reasoning. What's left, what's north of this other city, all of those kinds of things. And actually, this got translated. There was 100 million pages, or 200 million pages of text that were actually contained in the memory of the Watson computer. And by doing all of the different annotators to understand all of the different relationships of all the different information sources, the movie databases, Wikipedia, all of those kinds of things, it ingested every one of those information sources and actually created annotations. Well, this came at actually a significant price. So there was a 7-to-1 ratio. Once the annotators had completed in analyzing all that data, the data grew by 7 times. So it's a very important aspect that by taking all that information and doing all the reasoning, that you get a 7x factor of the data that you actually started with, when we started with a very significant problem of overwhelming information. So here's some example Jeopardy clues and missing links. This fish was thought to be extinct millions of years ago until one was found off South Africa in 1938. Category ends in TH. Anyone know the answer? Colcanath. When hit by electrons, a phosphor gives off electromagnetic energy in this form. Category general science. Light? Did I hear? Lights or photons? Secretary Chase just submitted this to me for the 3rd time. Guess what, pal? This time I'm accepting it. Category Lincoln blogs. His resignation. So you can see some of the challenges. And one of the other things is about the missing links and actually developing the relationships between these missing links. On hearing the discovery of George Mallory's body, he told reporters he still thinks he was first. So if you look at some of the supporting evidence, you see that George Mallory was related with Mount Everest. And about the fact that he was first linked with that actually led evidence toward Edmund Hillary. So this is the basic architecture of Watson. There was 7 banks of processors and 2,880 cores. One of the interesting things about this, it's not very interesting to have a TV show where it takes a computer 3 hours to answer a single question on a single core. So just like the Endeavor challenge, one of the main things and challenges of this particular application is scalability. So it took a team of 24 researchers to do all the annotations and the text over a period of 4 years. And if you actually think about what that really means, people think IBM, oh, you're this huge company, you invest billions of dollars in research. But just like you, we have very small teams. In this particular case, this was a grand challenge that was chosen 7 years ago when some of our executives were in a restaurant in New York, and they saw Ken Jennings, and everybody was gathering around the bar and watching Ken Jennings and his winning streak, I think, which he went on to win 82 games straight. And with that, they said, why can't we get a computer to actually take on that challenge? And so the basic idea is you're generating all these different hypotheses. You have 2,880 cores. You've architected them in the manner where you can scale, and you have to design a system to actually divide and conquer and actually come out and independently do all the different searching for evidence. And you have to actually do this in 3 seconds. Otherwise, it's not a very interesting game as well. Because, by the way, Ken Jennings is like a trained NASCAR driver. He is actually very good at answering questions, and he has a unique ability to answer the question and on average within 5 milliseconds of when Alex Trebek finishes his last phrase of the question, because you cannot buzz in before that. And we took a group of IBM researchers, and we talk about innovation, to make the best electromagnet possible. And our engineering teams designed this electromagnet to be able to, once it's pressed, to be able to give the fastest impact, to be able to press the button to try to compete with Ken Jennings. The average response time of that electromagnet was roughly 10 milliseconds. Why is that? It's because it could not predict what was going to happen in the future. Ken Jennings could actually listen to the phonetic syllables and know and predict when the last word was going to be sent. He presses the button before the last word is even read and averages within 5 milliseconds. That was the challenge that IBM was against in actually putting up this computer challenge. Any questions related to the architecture before we go on? And with that, let's go back to a background video that kind of gives you a behind-the-scenes look of what it took to actually produce and take this technology into the public eye.
Hello, my name is Watson.
When I heard about this project, I thought, I don't know whether they're planning on making a talk or having a visual readout of the answer, but I thought it's the perfect use for text-to-speech.
Who is Robert Browning?
Text-to-speech is particularly good in short phrases, and Jeopardy answers are indeed short phrases. We audition voice actors, dozens of them. The lucky winner gets to be in a recording booth for literally weeks, reading thousands and thousands of lines of text that we give them.
Each one of these symbols is a representation of a particular sound in the English language. And what you see here is a way of encoding the pronunciation.
Eres con palo. Arroz con pollo.
Many occasions I've called an embassy or a restaurant to ask them how to pronounce a certain dish or how a certain city in their country is pronounced, and people have told me. How many of those will actually appear in Jeopardy? Who knows? Maybe none, maybe one, but it will have been worth it if even one makes it.
It's a voice that sounds fairly self-assured, but just like any synthetic system, it makes mistakes. Watson, I guess, could be described as performing at a level of a very precocious child.
Conrad and his fans were back on Broadway in 2009 in a revival of this musical. Watson?
What is Jeopardy?
Yes, that is correct.
Television audiences, they don't want just some disembodied voice coming out of the television. For the visual composition of the screen, you don't want to have person, and then void.
I was one of a few artists that they were considering for the project. As a designer and a technologist, I want to feel challenged by the project that's being handed to me. And boy, does Watson bring some challenges. How do we make a machine that's going to be on television, that's going to play Jeopardy? How do we make it pretty?
Lots of thinking went into this. Should it be humanoid? Should it be abstract? In the end, what really made a lot of sense was to just be really clear that this is an IBM creation, and what better than the Smarter Planet logo for communicating that.
I had this idea that if I had a sphere, I could start to put in place variables and boundaries and controls to define that sphere. One of the first builds was something like this, just this swarming along a sphere. There's a leader running across the surface. There are 40 followers that are trying to chase that leader. I can tell Watson, you have a high level of confidence, you got it right. Maybe it swarms to the top, or, oh, bummer, you got it wrong. There are 27 triggerable states. We have answered, answering, answer correct, answer revealed, answer wrong, buzzer enabled, buzzer timeout, category selected, clue revealed, daily double.
I wish he'd take his eyes off me because I'm feeling very self-conscious.
We mapped 4 different colors to 4 different levels of confidence. So green would indicate that Watson has a very high confidence level for this particular category, that he probably knows the answer.
Watson.
What is finger?
No, that is wrong.
But he's ringing in green because
He had high confidence.
he had high confidence. He should have gotten that right. He's saying, I knew this.
Collectively, we'll think about this as kind of the front end of Watson. Josh's avatar computer, the Watson controller that basically translates the QA stuff in the back to the actual game-playing stuff that you observe.
This computer here is controlling the connections between the various parts that make up Watson. It's interacting with the DeepQA engine that's answering the questions. It's generating Watson's voice, and it is producing things like this, the answer panel.
When Watson does its computation, it comes up with a lot of possible answers to this question. And the answer panel shows what Watson is thinking about its answers. This is important because during the game, you have to make a decision. For every question, you have to decide not only what is my best answer, but am I confident enough in this to actually take a shot and buzz in an answer? Watson looked over these hundreds of answers to consider, and it ranks them according to how confident it was in each answer. This confidence bar is basically a probability that Watson thinks it's correct. Another thing that we show on the answer panel is the threshold, how confident we have to be to buzz in. As these scores change, we might realize that we have to buzz in. It's the only way we'll have a shot to win. So this threshold can go down. In other cases, we might be very far ahead, and so we know, well, we want to be careful here. We don't want to give up our lead. And so the threshold will go up, and we'll only go for those questions we're most sure in.
Let's finish Sci-Fi TV.
Sci-Fi TV for 400. Picard was put to the test by Q in this show's finale. We also learned Jean-Luc wed and divorced Dr. Crusher. Watson.
What is Star Trek? The Next Generation.
Nicely done. I feel like we're pioneering a whole genre of art that previously wasn't possible. I'm rooting for this thing that we've created to win. It's this overwhelming feeling of being a part of something historic.
So IBM Watson was part of a perfect storm. But it's not well known to actually the percentage of capability that we actually stood a chance to win that game. And so if you look at the perfect storm, the advances in natural language processing, combined with a huge amount of computing power, combined with the wealth of digitized information available to Watson, was how it was able to actually achieve this particular feat. But understanding that, I want to take you through what we call the winner circle. And so if you look at the baseline of this technology prior to 2007, so if you look at that's the different curve, percent answered with precision. And so in 2007, I told you the previous story of the summer student who came up with a completely different paradigm. And then IBM modeled the approach to go forward from that single summer student that actually joined IBM Research. And so if you look at the dates up to 3 months before the actual game was aired, there were significant advances in being able to tune all the independent annotators that had their job specialty to find out that particular piece of evidence or actually figure out how to weigh a particular piece of confidence from a particular data source. So if you look at that, it's a very interesting thing. If you look at the red dots, that's Ken Jennings. Ken Jennings was amazing. He could answer roughly 90% of the time with a 70 to 80% precision. And if Ken Jennings actually knew the answer, there's no way Watson could win. And so at the end of the day, we had an 83% chance to win the game. Now that's embracing a challenge. And so it's also embracing risk, which is also very important. But the reason why that's important is this posed a very significant challenge. Unbeknownst to most people, it was not a guaranteed feat. When we went into that game, it was a completely open match. And we came out the successors, but really the success is the innovation. And with that, I'd like to take you with, we actually can try a game and test your wit and skill, as I promised. So who wants to choose a category? Anyone in the front? Scrambled state capitals for 200. And by the way, actually at the top, this is an actual simulation of the Watson game. You can see he has a very high confidence, and he already came up with that in 1.5 seconds. Topeka. I think we have a correct answer. Anyone else? And you can see some of the categories here. You see the confidence bar on the top. You see some of the challenges of who's your daddy company, those kinds of things. And one of the very interesting things about the famous missed question, as far as believing that the airport was actually Canadian. And the reason why that is because there's a lot of rhymes and riddles, and what Watson found out in all of the sparring matches is that the categories are trying to fool you. And actually there's very limited confidence in the evidence provided in the categories, because most times they're trying to be funny and have wit and actually confuse. And so that's why we missed the famous question. Who's going to pick a category? How about who's your daddy for 600? GE. Oh. I hate to tell you didn't make the top 3, but that's okay. How about Hi Bob for 800? Any takers? Bob Hayes. Very good. How about Tectonics? Tectonics for 1,000. Any takers? Research and motion, very good. And you can see here that Watson had it right. He just had limited confidence to actually make a bet. And you saw in the video that the confidence bar, this is completely related to game theory. So not only do you have machine learning, you have textual analysis, there's game theory to determine, it's counting up everything on the board, how much money's left. The thing that's very difficult to account for is daily doubles. And that's why the 83% actually comes into play, because who gets the daily double completely can change the outcome of the game. Let's do one last question. Any takers? Countries ending in E for 800. Ukraine. Ukraine. You actually beat Watson. That was a planned event. So with that, I'll just open it up to any quick questions that you have about Watson, and I'll be here for a little bit while after the event if you have any more detailed questions. Any questions? What are we doing with Watson now? That's a very good question. I actually work in our healthcare analytics group. And so we're actually leveraging Watson in many different industries, whether it be in financial, help desk, really anywhere where we're focused on analyzing a vast amount of information. It's our belief that there's much information out there, but providing the right data and insight to the decision makers is obviously our goal. And in healthcare, we pose very significant challenges on being able to keep up with all the technology advancements, whether it be clinical trials, whether it be all those kinds of things, and actually providing a decision support system for physicians. And so right now we're working with a major provider here in the Silicon Valley, analyzing roughly 10 to 12 million patient records to understand how we can better offer differential diagnosis and come up with multiple candidates for the physicians using the Watson technology. Any other questions?
Do you produce many patents through these projects for IBM?
Well,
IP protection, patents?
IBM has many patents. I mean, IBM Research is the leader, obviously, in the number of patents for, I think, 10 or 12 years running. I think the second two combined don't make up the amount that IBM actually achieves each year. We do focus very heavily on patents in IBM Research. That's the contribution to the rest of our business. We have partnered, obviously, in the area of speech and text-to-speech, and we have focused on numerous patents, but at the same time, we've contributed to the UEMA standard and the open standard for being able to provide natural language processing. And that's the basis on which Watson is used. Any other questions? Go over here.
How does Watson compete with autonomy and other big data players? Question is, how does Watson compete with autonomy and other big data players?
Well, IBM Research is also focused on big data. I think the focus of Watson is really the natural language processing and understanding. And so it's really the deeper analysis, it's the annotation, it's understanding relationships, it's actually leveraging those relationships and understanding using multiple knowledge bases and information sources, scoring those different information sources and bringing those together to a single answer. The main focus on Watson is really leveraging the state-of-the-art in question-answer technology, which is actually somewhat different than big data and just the big data processing and analytics. And so it's really trying to change the paradigm to where you could actually walk up and ask a question to a very large information set of sources and actually come up with the answer. And so the whole Watson paradigm is really trying to leverage and focus on the QA type of an approach. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine right before the session, and he was saying something about Watson made a joke, and this is something related to singularity and stuff like this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Watson made a joke?
Yeah, asked the question, and the answer was actually a joke. And this is kind of significant in some way. Did that happen?
Actually, I'm not aware of that. Any other questions?
This is a wonderful exercise. What are the practical applications of this going forward, like 10 years from now? What do you guys, how are you going to make this available commercially, or what's going to come out of it? Is something going to come out of it that's in the practical reach of normal people?
Very good question. One of the big challenges is some of the same challenges that you have. As I mentioned, the team that did this was a team of 24 researchers. And right now, they are in overdrive, trying to figure out how to scale, which is the reason most of you are here. It's actually a very similar problem. And so currently, we're looking to try to focus those resources and identify the best applications where we can actually help and provide the initial impact and identify the industries where we can provide very significant impact. So the main focus that we've chosen currently is in healthcare and finance. Those are the two main areas that we're focusing the resources of Watson. Because you can imagine 4 years of 25 people, that's just kind of a simple A and B round as far as the investment community. And right now we're working across our research center to scale up more resources to actually try to respond to the significant amount of interest in industry. We're working here with the VCs here in the Silicon Valley and many companies, and we're really doing a selection process based on the data sources that are available where this technology can be leveraged, and we can come up with an application to really impact society. Very good question. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I came up with that same question. It's like, why don't you just text your question to Watson from your cell phone? And just like any ideas without boundaries, it turns out it was a bad one. And my colleagues in New York said, do you have any idea on how much that text message would cost? Because you're looking at 10 banks of 2,880 processors to field that text message question. And as I mentioned before, it roughly took 3 hours of one single processor to answer a question. And so I think the business model for that, they told me, was completely broken. And I know you're here because you actually have working business models. So we're going to have to come up with some other idea. And with that, I'll be available here till probably midday if you have any specific questions.